Welcome to the 31st episode of our series, Ideas and Lives. And we try to interview people who have interesting lives and compelling careers and good ideas. And our guest today is no exception. But my colleague, Svi Bodhi, will be introducing him.
Yes, I'm his colleague, Stephen Goss, and you should be seeing a picture of Steve Goss, who I've known for quite a few years. We probably met at a conference on pensions and retirement because that's our common interest. And Steve is the chief actuary of the Social Security Administration in the United States. And I think just recently he had to convey the regular report that he makes, the actuarial report. And Steve is an unusual actuary in that he's really interesting. We'll have to take that out.
Well, we've already had another interesting.
Welcome, and I'm going to start with our first question, which is, where did you grow up and where were you educated?
Well, thank you, Svi, and thank you very much, Bob. Great opportunity to be with you today. And I just have to throw this in. Bob, you said this is the 31st interview, so it'll be a prime number, even if not a prime interview.
Okay.
Boy, you must be an actuary.
Well, much to talk about on that topic because, actuaries, what are actuaries? But anyway, we'll get to that in a minute, probably. First of all, where did I grow up and where was I educated? Well, I was born in Chicago, and my parents moved away there when I was age 6 to move down to where they met during World War II in Miami, Florida. So I had the opportunity to grow up in Miami, Florida, which is a very different experience from Chicago. But going to school, well, one of the things I really remember so well was going to school in grade school all the way up through high school in Florida. And I remember it in, like many, we all have so many twists and turns in our lives that probably explain where we are and how we got there. And so many of them are stochastic, they're random. We could not have predicted them, nobody could have. And one that was for me, when I was in 10th grade taking geometry in the regular track of courses for 10th graders, Mr. Wyant, who was my teacher, when the results for the PSAT came out, said, you got to go talk to Klaus Nordmeyer, who is our advanced math teacher. And Klaus said to me, if you go take Algebra 2 over the summer, I'll let you into the advanced math program, which I had not been in prior to that. So I did and got in that. And, that probably has something to do with then, going on to college and majoring in math. But at first I didn't think I was going to be a math major. Really initially, I thought maybe I was going to be a philosophy major, but I found those courses were not all that exciting. So I went over to natural sciences. But I found that the math classes were best because they were small classes. Who wanted to take math anyway? And you got a full professor. But in either my second semester in freshman year or in my first semester.
Wait. Where was this? Where did you go to college?
This is at University of Pennsylvania in Philly.
Okay.
Which has many great advantage. The main one of which, of course, was I met my wife in biology lab in sophomore year. So that was the biggest takeaway of all for my undergraduate career. But also there were you had to take distributional requirement courses, and for social science they had all these different social science courses. I couldn't decide which one to take, so I thought economics might be the most interesting. So I simply picked economics as an elective course early in my sophomore year, and the guy, I wish I could remember his name. He was on University of Chicago. He was talking about Uncle Milty all the time. Everybody knows exactly that is. And
he meant Milty Friedman, of course.
He definitely meant Milty Friedman, yeah. And this is the only course I ever took in high school and college where I specifically chose to sit in the front row because it was conversational and it was fantastic. He was right out of grad school, had a great time. Well, the rest of the story then about that was at the end of my junior year, where I thought I was majoring in math, I talked to my advisor for probably the first time in 2 or 3 years. And my advisor said, "So what are you majoring in?" And I said, "Well, math, right?" And he says, "Well, you've also satisfied the major requirements for econ."
Oh, you took electives as well.
Yeah, I was so enthralled with the first micro or macro, first course of Samuelson, the fat book Samuelson, so took a few more courses, and pretty soon, within 2 years after that, I guess I'd satisfied the major requirements for economics. So he sent me over to College Hall, and I went over and I said, "Gee, could I be like, can I major in more than one thing?" And they said, "Well, okay." I think I might have been the first double major. But anyway,
Oh, really?
Wow.
so just a matter, just by way of happenstance, that's it. Now, the rest of the story, though, is then when you're getting done with your undergraduate and you're going to go to graduate school, what do you major in? And I sort of flipped a coin. It was math, but econ is not far behind. And when I was first hired, where I am now, initially I was doing the econ work for where I am.
So so you went to grad school in math?
Yeah, I went to grad school, and the sort of funny part of that was this is in 1971, and so I showed up at University of Virginia up at the math department. On the first day I showed up there, I went up there, and there were some guys who looked a little bit older who were standing around talking, and so I talked to them and I said, "Oh, you know what's going on?" And they said, "Well, we just got our PhDs 3 years ago, and have been out, working as assistant profs at various colleges. And since there are so many math PhDs lately, they said that they were let go after 3 years because there's a whole crop of new math PhDs that could be hired for, shall we say, not a lot of pay." So they were let go, and they were coming back to the school where they got their PhD, looking if they could find a way to get some work to feed themselves.
Wow.
So at that point, I decided maybe sticking around for a PhD wasn't the best. I figured 1 year and out, get a master's, and then find a job.
Which is what you did.
So that's what you did?
It is indeed, yeah, what I did.
And okay,
And what was that job?
How did you become an actuary?
Well, that is really, I don't know how common a story this is, but so I was completing my master's degree in math up at University of Virginia, and they had a placement office. So I went to the placement office and I said, "What kind of jobs do you have that I might qualify for?" And they were, teaching here, teaching there, something like that. So I sent them to. One day I saw a listing for a job at Social Security Administration, and I asked the obvious question, having been a major in economics in college. I said, "Do they pay money?" And at the placement office desk, they said, "Yeah, we think so." So I signed up. Now, a couple of days later, I came back for the interview, and this is one of those twists and turns that in our fate that I'm sure we all have many of. I came back for the interview, and I went up to the board, and my name was crossed off of that slot, and somebody else's name was written in. Some of y'all may be aware that University of Virginia has a very, very strict honor code. And at that time, back in the 18th century, well, not quite, but back at that time, it was enforced very, very heavily. So I went rather indignant up to the placement office desk and said, "What is this? My name is crossed off." And they said, "Well, we saw you had a math background, and there was another interviewer coming on the same day from Social Security Administration who was looking for people specifically with a math background." I said, "What is that?" And they said, "Actuary." And I said, "What is that?" So I might not be talking to you today, especially from the point of view of being an actuary, had it not been for the audacity of one person at the placement office at my grad school. So, and I'm sure Bob, Zvi, and everybody else who might ever see this little discussion could probably name a dozen of these in their lifetime where strange things happen. And otherwise,
yeah, we sure have seen a lot of random events. But then, I mean, you weren't an actuary yet, but they were ready to train you, or what?
Well, exactly. So, actuary is really an occupation where most people do not graduate with a degree in actuarial science, especially back in that day. There are some schools that do have majors and do have programs in actuarial science, but most people that go into actuarial science are usually math or stat and sometimes econ majors that go into that area. And there's a series of exams that you take to become, in effect, qualified. So it's really just sort of a profession where people move into it. And again, I guess I would characterize working as an actuary.
I'm a little confused. I'm a little confused. You get into it and you take these exams, but you don't know what actuarial science really is yet, right? I mean, when do you take the exams?
Well,
Where do you get the training to go from being just someone who's outstanding in math to someone who has a knowledge of what actuaries do?
Well, early at the first point at which anybody starts hearing what an actuary is, they usually hear the usual thing. They're the people that sit there, behind computers and determine what the likely experience is for an insurance product, whether it be annuity, pension, life insurance, whatever, and see what the experience is likely to be, and therefore what the cost is going to be for providing that kind of insurance. And based on what the expected cost is, what the premiums are going to have to be to charge people. And when you think about the work, as Bob UNSV have been mentioning for working on retirement policy, retirement analysis, is there a lot of different? And in fact, really not. I mean, what I have found here in the few years I've been working as an actuary since way back when, that actually it's really just a mix of math, statistics, economics, and a little bit of behavioral science. It's really much the same things that many people do in the area of economics. So
But aren't projections a big? Don't projections play a big role, or you just accept those, or what?
Oh, well,
Projections of future life expectancy and all the rest.
well, that's a great question. And in fact, in the office I work in at Social Security Administration, where we make projections for the future cost of Social Security, we start from the ground up. We make our own independent projections of the entire US population by age, sex, marital status, and just every other characteristic you can mention. So we project the population, whether people are native born, whether they are immigrants that might come or leave the country, what their status is. And then after we developed our own unique projections of the population, on top of that, we have to develop all of the economic aspects, which are the labor force participation rates, the employment rates, the kinds of jobs, the distribution by earnings levels, the distribution by types of employment, because not all types of employment are covered by Social Security. So we have to make projections of all of these based obviously on all the past experience and projection into the future. Then finally, we get to what you might say is sort of the actuarial work. We put together all our mortality, fertility, and immigration assumptions that give the population, along with all the economic projections, and put it together into what we expect the number of people working and contributing into the Social Security trust funds will be, and what the number of people who will work enough to become insured and be able to get a benefit, how many of them will start getting a benefit and when, and then put it all together and add it up. So really I would say that amongst all actuarial jobs, I am very happy to be the one that I am at, because we do get to make ground up projections of what the entire US population and economy is going to be. People who work as actuaries out in private industry, they have to wait for the sales force to come and pull together the people that want to buy a policy, and then they have to work from that. That's not our concern. The entire US.
Let me give you a piece of information about Bob Lerman. His one of his special fields, especially now in his later years, is apprenticeship. And so the question I would ask you is, when you were hired, were you apprenticed to some actuary who then mentored you, or how did it work?
You hit the nail on the head, really, and basically that's the word I was really searching for before. actuaries hired out of college or even out of grad school really are hired as apprentices. And typically in our office, they're given an opportunity to work, some of the time maybe in the economics segment where we do have a number of people in our economics section who are, you might call pure economists. They've got their PhD in economics and are not really functioning as actuaries. But we're a small enough office where people really working in all elements are exposed to everything that we do. So the apprenticeship usually is a combination of people working both in terms of looking at near-term budget estimates, at longer-term projections for mortality, for everything about the population and economics, and the nature of our beneficiaries. One of the big things we have to pay attention to, obviously, is whether prior to reaching retirement age, people might become significantly impaired and file for disability benefits. And that's both an economic and an actuarial consideration. All of these things will meld together. So you're exactly right. We don't really come out of college, even people who have an economic statistics. In fact, my predecessor as chief actuary, Harry Ballantyne, he was a major in college in physics. So any analytical pursuit is really fine. It's just a matter of what we found in our office. It's really a matter of people, just like every economist knows, people who have analytic skills, knowledge, and understanding, and are able to apply that in thinking about what we expect in any number of different environments.
Now, at the same time, you're expected to enroll in the study program and the examination program to become a fellow of the Society of Actuaries, correct?
Exactly. And the good news is if you look at the syllabus for various exams, they cover things like, basic math, they cover statistics. There's actually one course, and there has been in the past, that was literally about economics. There's one course that I recall back then was called Life Contingencies, which is basically the study of mortality and annuities per se. So really all of the sort of basic ingredients that actuaries and economists utilize and financial planners utilize in the kind of work that we all do is really built into that area.
And are you
Demography, it sounds like demography, a big element, demographies.
Oh,
Do you have demographers?
well, we have demographers, basically people who have come to us. Not sure that we have many people or any people that literally went to college specifically studying demography. I mean, my alma mater, University of Pennsylvania, as you're all
They
aware,
have a big program.
they've got a big program in demography, but the last I checked, it was really under the sociology department. So,
oh, interesting.
So, Sam Preston is still there and doing great work. And I'm sure you're all familiar with him. I worked with him for many, many years, great guy. And so demography per se is also an area that I think to some extent is kind of an apprenticeship area. It's a matter of people that come out with good analytical skills and knowledge and are inquisitive, go and look into the area. So that's, our demographers are really that. There are people who look very carefully. We work with the Bureau of Census, NCHS, CDC, on all this material. And, very topical to this point, we spend an enormous amount of time with friends over at CDC, like Bob Anderson, who's the head of death statistics at the CDC, working on those.
Now, the CDC stands for?
The Centers for Disease Control over in the Department of Health and Human Service. So, we work with all those folks, with people in academia, people in government in various places, because as you can imagine, with the projections we have to make for the country as a whole, for what argued to be the world's largest pension program, we really need to be delving into every aspect of our population, society, and economy. Which is why
even Urban Institute.
We've run across each other so many times.
Right.
Yeah, Urban Institute has this Dynasim model that is part of works with you guys. So I haven't worked on that model directly, but I know that a lot of good people do. And there are a lot of things that I would think may or may not have a big impact that are kind of social trends that have emerged over time, including especially things that I worked on years ago on family structure, on the types of marriage rates and divorce rates and non-marital births and the interaction of all of that. So you have to sort of pretty much cover everything.
We really do. And the fortunate thing about the primary area that we work in, Social Security benefits, is marital status can be very important, as we all know, because that's the information on whether or not a spouse or a child might be able to get a benefit in certain circumstances. And thank you for mentioning Dynasim over at Urban, because, with folks like, Karen Smith and Melissa Favreau and Gene Sterling, we work with them like almost daily. In fact, we just in the past couple of days got this year's request for information based on our most recently issued trustees report, the material we put in there to share with them, so they'll have a sense at least of what we've got for our baseline. By the way, as you well know, Bob, their model is basically a micro simulation model. We at our program, as you would guess, we have both micro simulation and macro models to be able to try to cover everything. We found that really the combination of all possible models you can imagine, they're all have their strengths and weaknesses, and so we really sort of try to run in every lane.
Yeah, and the mortality tables are, I guess it's the Society of Actuaries that, I don't know, creates the standard mortality tables, or do you have your own mortality tables?
Well, great point to raise. The Society of Actuaries does, on the basis of material from the Human Mortality Database, which is really sort of an international concept. They work on developing mortality tables, but keep in mind, mortality tables are a little bit tricky. As with any rate, you really like to have your numerator and denominator be as consistent as possible. And for the data that are used really around the world for basic national data, oftentimes the death statistics, as in the US, come from the NCHS based on state reports of deaths, whereas the denominator for mortality rates, the population, come from the Bureau of the Census based on census. And as Sam Preston has pointed out many times in the past, and we all understand, there can be differences when you get reports of your population and your deaths from different sources, even just in terms of the misstatement of age. So we really have an edge here, at least for 65 and over. The mortality statistics that we develop at SSA, we work on a combination of data that we have at SSA and at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And therein we have information that is entirely consistent. Our population, we have our population by age, sex, and we actually have year of birth. We have them identified. And we also have, when somebody dies, we have information for the same people with the same background information. So there are some differences. We have some material up on our web about some of the differences in the reported mortality rates based on the Human Mortality Database and what we have. And there are some differences, and we think that's largely because of the inconsistency between the numerator and denominator for death rates. And by the way, we've heard the same thing from the folks in the UK and elsewhere.
Well, the census, it's known that there are undercounts of different populations, and that could play a role. Although it's not a huge percentage amount, but for certain groups, it's not so small. But I don't know whether some of these things sounds like there's a big issue of what calculations are very sensitive to what. In other words, do some things sort of cancel out, or some things sort of, even if you miss it by 10%, it's not going to make a big difference. Other things, it will make a big difference. You have to go into all that.
Well, there's no question. And I'm just one example for example, that is very, very topical. is what is the implication for disability in the future and for mortality going to be from our recent experience in COVID?
Yeah.
And we know that two factors are acting. One is that we have unfortunately lost about 1 million people specifically to COVID over the last 2.5 years, about 3/4 of which are over 65. And that's had sort of a selection factor on our population. Clearly, people who have come into the COVID era with more compromises in their own physiology are more likely to have been lost as a result. So that some have argued that's going to leave our residual population healthier than would otherwise be the case. However, there's another factor which wonderfully the World Health Organization refers to as post-COVID conditions, sometimes a little bit misleadingly referred to as long COVID, but post-COVID conditions, as with any insult that we might have experienced, whether it's a broken leg at some time or falling down the stairs at another time in our life, having been infected by COVID, even if we were not severely ill, is probably going to have some negative effects on us. So that might cause some people who might not otherwise have become disabled or died at a younger age than might otherwise have been the case to become disabled, or to die at age 83 instead of age 85 sometime in the future. So all of these balancing effects, exactly as you mentioned, Bob, are there, which has caused us in the last couple of years to assume that we know those will tend to be offsetting, and the gigantic question is, to what extent will they be offsetting?
Now, let me ask you for a ballpark estimate. Longevity, the trend towards living longer. At one point, I seem to remember it was life expectancy, overall life expectancy is expected to increase by 1 year for every 5 years we progress into the future. Is that a meaningful estimate today, ballpark?
Well, it's meaningful for those who would estimate that. But one of the little name drop here, really a really good friend who I enjoyed so much working with in the past, but unfortunately lost in the last couple of years, Jim Vopel. Don't know if you're familiar with him, a demographer over at Max Planck Institute. Actually,
In
sure,
Germany?
Over in Germany, exactly, yeah, and he's originally from, I think, Denmark. But in any case, he was one, along with Jim Oppen of the UK, who put out some years ago the idea of a linear increase, arithmetic increase year after year in life expectancy at birth over time. And we thought, really? That would require, as I think all of us know, actually an accelerating rate of decline in mortality rates. Not just a constant rate of decline, but an accelerating rate of decline in mortality rates. Now, for a long time, a lot of demographers were looking at the experience of the last half of the prior century, when we always argue it was wonderful after World War II. We had great economic growth, we had antibiotics come to the fore, and then we had tremendous improvement in cardiovascular disease from statins, stents, and everything else. And in the latter half of the last century, unfortunately for the baby boomers, both of those sort of came in their lifetime. I will raise my hand on that, and maybe some others might too. But so the question is, in the future, can we expect that rate of decline in mortality rates in the future? And our office has literally for decades now argued that some deceleration should really be expected. And again, one mentioned again, Bob Anderson, who's put together tremendous charts because they look at not just death rates, but death by cause. We depend a lot on their information. And on graphs he has put together, and we've used those in a lot of our presentations, you can see death rates from cardiovascular, from heart disease, have dropped rapidly, but now they're sort of leveling off. There's only so much you can get out of interventions in an area. At some point, we're all going to die someday, right? So it's death and taxes. So at this point, I think we're seeing since 2009 in the U.S. and the UK and Canada and other countries, we've seen really a deceleration in mortality improvement, and we are the least surprised on this. We have, by the way, in our office, we've been arguing that probably the longer term ultimate rate of decline in mortality might be about 0.7%, 0.73% per year. There are still many who want to argue 1% or faster mortality improvement rates. We think that's unrealistic. It's been well less than that since 2009, and further deceleration seems likely. That is barring the miracle wonder drug that will come and knock out all cancer, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
By the way, we've gotten a lot of help, again, as I mentioned over the years, by talking to folks in various places. I mean, I can tell you back in the mid 1980s when HIV came around, funny little story here that I'm sure you'll find kind of worth a little laugh. But at the time, we were wondering, what exactly is this HIV going to be doing to us? So I called over at the CDC a guy who was there then at the time named Mead Morgan and said, hey, Mead, what is this HIV really going to do? And he says, well, it's like a pandemic. It's going to be an epidemic for a while. But here we are in 1985. It's probably going to have like increasing death rates for a while, but which will probably, peak after a while, and then they'll fall back to a level maybe about 1/3 of what they were at the peak. So I asked the obvious question that we really needed to know. So Mead, when will the peak be? He says, probably around the turn of the century. And as it turned out, the peak was 1999. Darn, he missed it by a year. But it just goes to show just having a model to project something is great. But talking to people who are really experienced in a specific area is really, really handy. So we've always found that practice. And
so basically what so it's the model with judgment.
Bob, that's exactly, and to the earlier question, the biggest question mark is always wasn't it Yogi Berra said, projections into the future, projections are hard, especially into the future. And that's where really it's the mix, as all economists and actuaries and statisticians know, it's the mix between, science and art, and judging what is going to happen in the future really requires an awful lot. You might call it art. The way we typically try to characterize it is it's an easy gig to say, look at the past period, and look at the trends of the past and get out a ruler and take that as being your best guess as the future. But really, we've always felt the much better thing to do is look at the past and try to understand what the conditions were that contributed to the past experience. Then the question you have to ask yourself and anybody else who might have knowledge on this, what do you think the conditions are going to be in the future, near term and long term, in that same area? And only once you have the best possible understanding of how you think conditions may be either the same or changing in the future, only then are you going to be in a position to make a good estimate, or dare we say, guess, as to what the trends in the future will be. So simply getting out of past trends is never a good idea.
One thing that, what you're doing is not merely an academic exercise. It's not only a policy exercise, but it's also in many ways, as policy wants to do, ventures into the political. And over the years, a question that I have is, to what extent has any kind of political complaints been gone toward your team's estimates and your availability to respond to them?
Well, more specifically, during the, which Bush was it? His father or George W., when they were talking about, privatizing at least part?
George W.
Was that W?
Yep, it was. Well, it's a great general question and a great specific of it. Let me just share with you what we have tried to do as actuaries at the Office of the Actuary, the administration, is the one thing we never ever do or will never answer is what do you think would be the best solution? Because it's a little bit like asking the umpire on the ball game, do you like the Red Sox or the Yankees better? you know, even if they have a preference or never, no, they'll never say. And I have to admit to you that I've been doing this so long here that I don't think I'm even capable of having a preference anymore. So what we always try to do when policymakers come to us and say, I'd like to make a change, the first question we ask is, what exact change do you want to make? Who do you want to affect, and what way do you want to affect them? And the way that we can be useful, and I think we have been useful to people on both sides of the aisle, people with very, very different objectives, is to find out with them what their goal is, what their objective is. And then we can share based on our experience and our knowledge and understanding what the most efficient and effective ways are to make changes that can get them to their goal. And as you've all seen up on our website, when we write letters to members of Congress about proposals that we made estimates for that they've come up with, we try to, as in simple, direct terms, explain just what their proposal is and how it would affect things in an entirely neutral and objective manner, so that anybody, especially who our policymakers might have to vote on that bill, will have a solid and objective basis for it. So
But my question also relates to the issue of whether or not, let's say, because you may be delivering somewhat bad news, whether any political actors would go after the projections themselves. In other words, not what is the impact of my proposal based on your projections, but you're projecting this. We really don't believe that's going to happen. You're scaring us. And therefore, you know, why don't you do it right? Do you ever get any of that?
Well, we tend to get questions, and really what you're saying here, Bob, it sort of splits between the two halves of our work that we do. One is the present law projections of what we expect to be happening under present law. And the other then is the implications of potential changes in law. And we do get questions quite often about our projections under current law. Do you think the birth rates you're assuming for the future are really the most likely, the rate of change in death rates, et cetera, et cetera? And as we all know, you know, ex post analysis is not always perfect because there are always surprises. But I think we're pretty happy with our record, actually, on where we've come out. In fact, we actually had a hearing, I think it was Sam Johnson, Ways and Means Committee, back, it might have been 2016, asked us and the then director of the CBO to come and put forth a comparison of the projections we'd made for the trustees at Social Security and what they'd made at CBO. And we've got it up on website, at least on the webpage under congressional testimonies, at least what my testimony was. And we've got a bunch of graphs that were asked showing the differences in our projections. And I think we've been pretty good on that.
Well, the CBO being the Congressional Budget Office.
Exactly.
Do they have their own actuaries and make independent assessments?
Well, they do have economists and budget analysts. They do not have any actuaries. But we do talk with them a lot, and we share information with them a lot. And the good news is, even though we do have somewhat different projections of the future based on different assumptions, again, assumptions are key. When it comes to the estimating the potential cost effect or the implications of proposals, historically, their estimates have tended to be very, very close to ours. And we sure have a lot of information with CBO, just as we have, to Bob's point earlier, about with the Urban Institute and many other places. So we do have the great advantage of having direct access to even, you know, micro data about the population that is covered, insured, and in benefit for Social Security, which of course is most of the population. So we do share that with other entities.
You also fund research at universities, like my good friend Alicia Minnell's center at Boston College. And then there's another center for research at, I guess it's Michigan. And it's mostly Social Security funding, right, for those centers?
It is indeed. We have something called the Retirement and Disability Research Consortium. There are the three hubs, and one of the others, of course, is at my alma mater, Olivia Mitchell.
Right, Pennsylvania Pension Research Center.
at the Pension Research Council. And each of these hubs incorporate people from a number of different universities. And Social Security Administration, not just our office, puts forth an agenda every year or 2 or 3 years of areas of focus where the Social Security Administration can be helped by the great array of folks in academia who have the time, effort, and resources to be able to add to what we know. We have only so many people employed at SSA. We only have about 50 people in my entire office for all the work we have.
Oh, is that right? And so are you in charge? You're the chief and you have 50 people reporting to you, essentially?
Well, I'm the chief actuary and we have 49 other people, right, working our stuff. We have been at times somewhat larger than that, up closer to 60. But budgets have consequence and ability to hire. And of course, we all know that in any venue, whether you're working at a university or the government, eventually some people will get older and might even decide to retire. Perish the thought. But so you need to have new people coming in. We fortunately in the current administration have been able to hire 4 people very recently, which is going to be a great infusion to our office. 2 of whom, by the way, are academic economists.
Oh, is that?
Now, you focus on, as we would expect, the old age. It's actually called OASDHI,
Yep.
the Old Age Survivors and Disability
Sure.
and Health Insurance.
Right.
To what extent, now, some of the people that get old or get disabled in various cases are on the federal transfer program, supplemental security income, which the Social Security Administration is broadly responsible for the administration of, along with states. But to what extent does your office even touch that program?
Well, actually, we touch that program essentially to the same extent that we touch the Social Security OASDI, Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance Program. By the way, the age part, hospital insurance is part of Medicare. And we get involved in that because, by the way, we have the same board of trustees overseeing the Social Security trust funds as oversee the Medicare trust funds. As you might imagine, the population projections that we develop and the projections for the economy that we developed are used equally for the Medicare programs and the Medicare trust funds as they are used for OASDI. But for the SSI, Supplemental Security Income Program, we make projections for them as well. The one big distinction is that we make only 25-year projections into the future for SSI. We make 75-year projections for OASDI and for the Medicare side. And the other real interesting distinction for SSI is the benefit structure. The benefits for SSI increase also every year by the CPI-based cost of living adjustment, but that's the entirety of the increase for people who are newly coming into SSI and staying on SSI from year to year. Where Social Security, we have really basically a wage-based benefit structure, so that people turning 62 5 years from now will tend to get a benefit that'll be 5 years of wage growth higher than people who are similarly situated coming out at age 62 this year. Not so for SSI.
What's the relation between those two indicators? Is the wage growth greater than CPI?
Historically, the difference has been real wage growth has been 1 to 1.5% faster, and we're currently assuming about 1.1% faster into the future. That's a point of much consideration. Again, another Yogi Berra issue. It's difficult to know what that is. And when I first came to this office many years ago, we were operating, and by the way, just a little idea where we sort of missed back in 1983. Part of the reason that the world has not turned out quite as positive as estimated back in 1983 is our assumption for real wage growth at the time was 1.5% per year in the future. We have not realized that we're now assuming less than that. But I should share with you that we in the Office of the Actuary, we do not have complete control over the assumptions. Actually, the law requires that the Board of Trustees, Secretaries of Treasury, Labor, Health and Human Services, and the Commissioner of Social Security are the ones that actually put forth, and we recommend assumptions to them, but they ultimately get to make the call on what assumptions will be used for the reports.
So now it's 1.1%?
Right, about 1.1% is our current estimate for the real growth rate in wages into the future. 1.1 to 1.2 in that area. And of course, that
Well,
from one year to the next.
going back to SSI, I mean, there's no trust fund for SSI, so it's just direct government expenditures. So the kind of projections that relate long-term benefits to trust fund dollars wouldn't be there. It's a matter of those spending in those years.
Exactly. So for those, we make projections of the number of people expecting to become and start to receive SSI payments. And by the way, there's a large number of people who receive SSI who also receive Social Security benefits. So people who have worked relatively little and are getting a very small Social Security benefit might get an excess top-up benefit over the top of that from SSI. And that's a lot of the people who are receiving such payments. By the way, as you'll not be surprised, when we make our projections for SSI recipients in the future, we take into account the fact that we do believe and understand there will be continued real growth in income on average and to some extent across the board in our national economy. And therefore, all else equal, that should result in a somewhat diminishing share of our population coming to us for SSI payments. Because the SSI payment rate, the federal benefit rate, again, increases only with the CPI, the all item CPI for CPIW, whereas we're expecting that in the future, there will be some real growth in income and in earnings for people pretty much across the board. So that should result in
But I think one of the things that happened, we thought many years ago when welfare programs and Social Security started, among social policy analysts, there was the idea that the programs that were income tested, that were welfare programs, would kind of wither away as the role of social insurance tended to expand. But in terms of the SSI in particular, I think when you have a lot of immigrants come in who don't have, there may be parents of people who came first and they're allowed to come in, don't have Social Security records. I'd imagine that played a role in preventing SSI from withering away as much as it might have.
Well, that's a really great point, Bob. But remember, an important distinction here: to receive SSI payments, you need to be a citizen.
Yes. But they might become citizen, but they might not have a long earnings record that would qualify them for Social Security.
There indeed can be some of that, but that requires that people who come as an immigrant become a legal permanent resident and then qualify to gain status as a citizen, which takes some time. And generally, people who follow that path are people that end up having a pretty good earnings record and get benefits. There is one other category where people can get SSI. There are certain classes of refugees, but those are relatively few in number.
Yeah, few in number.
Yeah. So,
now, one thing that you hear a lot of among young folks is the fear that they're not going to get Social Security benefits. They're going to pay in, but then they're not going to get benefits. In fact, I hear that a lot from financial planners and others. Should you figure on Social Security benefits being what they are today? How do you answer that question?
it's a great question. We also hear that a lot. And let me just give you the answer that I always provide. Well, first of all, there are a few absolute certainties in life, other than death and taxes, of course. But Social Security is right up there as relatively certain. And two things. First of all, just looking at the past, Social Security first started paying out monthly benefits in 1940, and it has never missed a payment, made a payment late, or made a payment short of what was scheduled in the law in all the time since then. Could it happen in the future? Absolutely. One thing we do key on is that Social Security benefits are not really strictly a liability on the government. They really are an obligation. They're an obligation dependent upon the law, the Social Security Act. And Congress could at any time make a change in the Social Security Act. But to this point, changes made in the Social Security Act have always supported the continuance of Social Security benefits at every turn. We've had many times we've reached a point where one of the other trust funds was approaching a point of depletion of the reserves. For example, as we're projecting now, the combined OESI and DI trust funds, we're projecting in 2035, if there's no congressional action, we'd reach the depletion of the reserves and only have enough continuing tax income coming in 2035 to pay 80% of the scheduled benefits. Now, even if Congress acts in no way at all, and all of our projections come true, and we hit 2035 and we only have 80 cents on a dollar available, then the commissioner at the time would have to decide, do I pick my 80% most worthy beneficiaries, or do I pay everybody 80 cents on a dollar? What do we do? The good news is we've never been confronted with making that choice, because the Congress understands the implications of a 20% reduction in benefits for 1 in 6 US residents. They realize that would probably be unpopular. And given that our members of Congress oftentimes are seeking re-election, we have not reached a point yet where Congress has ever allowed the trust fund to be depleted. In fact, even as recently as 1995 and 2015, the Disability Insurance Trust Fund was approaching reserve depletion. And 1 year short of when that would have occurred, the Congress acted to make changes to avoid that. So I would say that when you get asked this question, will Social Security benefits be there for you in the future? That's dependent upon the Congress continuing to act on a timely basis. And their continuing to act will probably depend on the extent to which the American people want to see these benefits actually coming through to them. And so far, the track record is really clear.
I have a kind of concern with the way we talk about benefit reductions in Social Security, because one way of thinking about the benefits is the annuity value, the full, the present value of the annuities that you're expected to receive based on the law. And then when life expectancy goes up, there's, in a sense, an automatic increase that is not thought of as an increase, but is a real increase from the perspective of the present value of the stream of benefits that you would have otherwise gotten. And I wonder if that's, you can't change the law, but I wonder if any time that people have been able to kind of make this point to the public, to members of Congress, and so on.
Well, that, Bob, you're hitting the nail on the head. That's a very, very important topic. And going all the way back to the 1983 amendments, which was the first time we actually enacted a change in our normal retirement age, which had been 65 starting in 1940 all the way until 2000. And in 2000, we started inching up the so-called normal retirement age, where you get your so-called full benefit, and it's now 67. But there was 17 years of work for that to start going up. That was indeed motivated by the notion of the fact that people are living longer, and therefore the way typically this has been looked at by policymakers that we've talked to is is that as people are living longer, to the extent that's happening because people are healthier at any given age, people should be able to work to a higher age. So one way that this has been looked at, we've done many estimates, we have them up on the web, of what if we were to change our normal retirement age to increase such that the sort of relationship between your life expectancy at the normal retirement age and the number of years from age 20 up to that age would stay about a constant ratio. And I think that was sort of the question I think you're mentioning, Bob, of keeping us in sync with having the contribution years and the retirement benefit receipt years staying about the same ratio, and that would tend to balance that longevity effect. And we've estimated long ago, and we're still essentially there, if we increase the normal retirement age about 1 month every 2 years, that would occur. We've done estimates for actually putting that in the law as an automatic adjustment. It could be done either by that prescription,
Yeah.
or done by the realization of mortality improvement.
One thing I don't understand is what, since age 70 is when benefits can't be increased any further. It seems to me that you ought to frame it the same, numbers, but say 70 is the age of full benefits. And if you start earlier, it gets reduced by 8% per year instead of the other way around. In this behavioral economics, framing makes a big difference. So the expectation ought to be, well, we'll work till 70 if we want to get full benefits. But if we start before that, we get reduced benefits.
Zvi, that's a point often made, and it really is a framing issue.
Yeah, framing.
Yeah. Well, and our current age 67, which used to be 65, some refer to that as the full retirement age. But we tend to, in our realm, refer to it as so-called normal retirement age, which, by the way, is the term typically used by actuaries in pension plans, the normal retirement age. And at least it goes somewhat in the direction you're suggesting, V, by virtue of the fact that it used to be 65 and it's raised to 67 now. But remember, the additional credit you get for delaying your start of benefits after age 67 is referred to as the delayed retirement credit. And that increasingly has encouraged more and more people to start their benefits at a higher age. But to the point of the framing, back maybe 10 years ago, the average age at which people started receiving their Social Security retirement benefits was about 63 and a half. More recently, it has gone up to about 65. So one way or the other, people have gotten the message. And by the way, as all economists know, and actually if you pay attention to this, the employment to population ratio has been increasing, especially over 60, at a very nice rate, at all ages above 60. So the idea of people being healthier, better able to work for longer periods of time, and also our sense is that the changing nature of work, not just that we're doing everything Zoom nowadays, but even over the last 10 or 20 years, the changing nature of work in our society with increased academic attainment by more and more of our population, and with changes in the nature of work. There's a day when Bob, Zvi, and we might have been out there, digging ditches or something like that, back in the day. But now we're doing desk work, and we can probably continue to do that to a higher age and incur less damage on the way. So there are a lot of positives. But you're right. If we were to frame the normal retirement age as 70, that would clearly have some impact. And we see that by seeing a clump in the number of people that start receiving benefits at the age we call normal retirement age. And as a sub to that, there's also a clump of people starting benefits at age 65 still. And the reason for that is because that's the age at which Medicare benefits are first available for non.
Right.
So that's an age. Now that age has not been increased.
So I think that leads maybe to Zvi's last questions about your own retirement planning and your own thinking. Do you ever plan to retire?
Oh my gosh. Well, this sort of takes me back to
You
one.
got a great job. You got a stimulating job.
It's I cannot tell you how fun and stimulating it is. All the people we get to work with, and the other 49 people that work in the office that I'm in, are amazing and wonderful. It's people come and stay and work in this place because they're really dedicated to the proposition, and it's really great. But Zvi has heard this little story many times. There was a little deal that Zvi put together some years ago, where at one point he had three Nobel laureates there, and one of them was Paul Samuelson. Well, my first economics textbook, probably for many of us. And Zvi, I think it was you asked the question, so what are your plans for retirement? And I remember like yesterday, I'm not sure I can get the words verbatim, but I'm pretty close. He said, well, my plans for retirement are to keep working. That's what I've got going on. I'm going to keep working. That's the value of what I know and can do. I'm going to just keep working. And the other one, an adjunct to that, by the way, one of the other two was Bob Solow, who was also a Nobel Prize winner for economic growth theory. And I was so tickled when you or somebody asked him, "What are your plans?" And he said, "How do you invest for your retirement?" And he said he decided years ago he was just going to pop them in an index fund and not pay any attention because, and I'm pretty sure these are the words he said. And correct me if I'm missing this. I'm pretty sure he said, "I don't really know enough about like the markets to be able to make intelligent decisions. More than the people who work in the markets day in, day out. That's not my job." I felt so good because that's the same conclusion I had come to.
Right.
Small.
He actually, first of all, let me point out that anyone who wants to see a video of that panel discussion can see it. It's at the CFA Institute website. And I have a link to it on my website. And periodically I watch it. It took well over an hour, I think. It was more than an hour and a half. And of the three of them, none had any plans to ever retire.
Yeah.
Now, said that, the MIT economics department has an unwritten rule that you stop taking salary at age 70. Okay.
So that's what happened to Peter Diamond, because I was at his retirement party and was asked that he was actually retired, but he hasn't.
No, he still has his office. He
of course.
still and does research.
Yeah.
He just doesn't get a salary anymore.
Hey, and
Get Social Security at age 70. So
no, we have no retirement policy. And since I mentioned one number earlier, I just would mention that I'm going by age 29 now, but I'm not telling you what base number system I'm operating in this year. So keep in mind,
that's one I've never heard before. That's good.
You can toggle between 28 and 29 for the rest of your life. Just keep adjusting your base number system. I gave up on 10 a long time ago.
Good. That's very good.
If I could drop one other name, having mentioned Milton Friedman earlier, there's one other name I have to mention in this context, and it's in the way I get to it is because many years ago, Jeff Liebman, who had worked with a lot over in the Clinton administration, he said, "Hey, there's this thing called the NBER," and he said, "Hey, we have some really interesting meetings talking about Social Security and everything else." He says, "Can you get to one of those?" And I said, "Wow, I would love to." So I got there, and halfway through that meeting, he said, "I told a certain person named Martin Feldstein that, you knew something about Social Security, but you haven't said anything yet." I said, "Oh, you're expecting me to say something." So then I said that. Well, a couple of NBER meetings after that, at one point, I said to Marty that I said, "Well, thank you so much for being willing to let an actuary come to the NBER meetings." And he made my day. He made my year. He said, "Steve, you're not an actuary, you're an economist." So,
oh boy, wow.
He didn't know about my little undergrad, cred, but I think to me, what that really meant is Marty was one of the great people who understand whatever your academic background is, it's what you're doing lately that really matters. And why it's so fantastic to be associated with all of you all, the economics community and the actuarial community. And please, let's never any of us be strangers.
Oh,
Well, thank you so much. That's a wonderful way of concluding. We've taken a lot of your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And as we end, we have a phrase.
yes,
that,
we end by saying sei gesund,
sei gesund.
which is Yiddish for farewell. Be well.
Be well.
Okay, farewell, but not for long.
All right. Sei gesund.